I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to our combined Operation Freedom briefings and our Dave versus the MSM video series. Merry Christmas. It is a wonderful Christmas Eve. And we look forward to many more wonderful Christmas Eves to come. Remember, during the Obama regime's power trip, it was so crass to wish someone a Merry Christmas. And then it got the gauntlet, the heavy-handedness of the oppression got released a bit from 2016 to 2020, but then we had more of the Biden-Harris regime's suppression of the Christmas spirit. Well, it shouldn't take anybody by surprise. Marxists, totalitarian thugs, despise Christmas. Because Christmas is about so many things, as you know. Peace, goodwill toward men and women and children. A time of thanks. A time of miracles. And the last thing totalitarian thugs and Marxists want is for you to be thinking about the welfare of society, the welfare of yourself, the welfare of your family, the welfare of all those around you, the welfare of your community, the welfare of our constitutional republic. No. They want you to pay homage to them and their fellow totalitarian globalist cult thugs. Which is why the last thing they want is for all of us to wish each other a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And that's the last thing they want. But they're going to get a whole plate full of Merry Christmas this year. Today I want to bring forward a couple stories my mom gave me, the historian. She always, her philosophy was as a history teacher for you to dig deep in history, to not believe and take for granted what's in the textbooks, to really dig deep into the history of a person, of an event, of a situation that had been documented in a historical standpoint. And today I want to talk about what she taught me about the forgotten Christmas miracle. It actually emanated from a globalist cult event. It was a story that occurred during World War I. You see, all the world wars, whether they're one or two or what we're now experiencing, World War III, they're all the making of the globalist cult. Deep state, criminal international banking syndicate, a shadow government, globalist syndicate, criminal international banking syndicate, they're all the same. They foment war, and they love world wars, for a number of reasons. Their playbook tells them if they foment a war, they get, in the end, more power, control, and more financial resources. In addition, these psychopaths, and they are criminal psychopaths. That's a diagnosis. It's not name calling, it's a diagnosis, an accurate diagnosis. These criminal psychopaths see world wars as having another benefit, the destruction and demise of us, the useless eaters that they call. They call us the useless eaters, they do. The 0.1% calls all of us that aren't in their circle, and we have to thank God for that, the useless eaters. And it's the useless eaters that go to war to fight the bankers and the cults' wars. And it's the useless eaters who die. A Rockefeller or a Rothschild or a Lazard, a Pincus, a Warburg, a Seif, a Loeb, or a Pessoa never dies in a war. That's not, they're just so lucky. It's because it's all planned. Let's historically turn to a couple quick quotes. First from JFK. Quote, "For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy," can you say globalist cult, "that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short. With a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match." End quote. JFK. Let's add to that fuel to the fire George Orwell from his book 1984, that the cult uses as a bit of a playbook, by the way. He talked about the purpose of war. He wrote about it. In short, he states, the purpose of war is to keep the ruling class in power while the lower classes remain powerless and end up fighting those wars on behalf of the banking syndicate, the banksters, the globalist cult, the deep state. They're all the same. Which brings me to Smedley Butler, a major general in the Marines, at the time of his death, the most decorated Marine. In 1935, he wrote a book, War is a Racket. And I've spoken about this before, but it bears repeating in light of the story I'm about to tell you, given to me by my mom. Smedley Butler said the following in his book. "War is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the masses, you and me. I won't go to war again as I have done to protect some lousy investment of the bankers," he wrote. "There are only two things we should fight for. One is the defense of our homes, and the other is the Bill of Rights. War for any other reason is just simply a racket." It may seem odd for me, a military man, to adopt such a comparison. Truthfulness compels me to do so. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of this country's most agile military force, the United States Marine Corps. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general. And during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I suspected I was just part of the racket at the time. Now I'm sure of it. Like all the members of the military profession, I never had a thought of my own until I left the service. My mental faculties remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of higher-ups. This is typical with everyone in military service. During those years, I had, the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. Looking back on it, I feel as though I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best Capone could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts in the Midwest. I, on the other hand, as part of the Marines, carrying out the orders of the bankers, operated on 3 continents. Smedley Butler. Which brings me to the forgotten Christmas miracle that occurred during World War I. Not just one miracle, but several, that you won't find in your history books. They weren't in my history books. But my mom taught me about these. The story of the World War I Christmas truce. This is by Mike Dash. It's become a great legend of World War I, but what really happened when British and German troops emerged from their trenches on that Christmas day? Even at the distance of a century, no war seemed more terrible than World War I. In the 4 years between 1914 and 1918, it killed or wounded more than 25 million people. More than did any other war before or since. Yet there were still odd moments of joy and hope in the trenches of Flanders and France, and one of the most remarkable came from the first Christmas of the war, a few brief hours during which men from both sides of the Western Front laid down their arms, emerged from their trenches, and shared food, carols, games, and camaraderie. Their truce, the famous Christmas truce of 1914, was unofficial and illicit. Many officers disapproved, and headquarters on both sides took strong steps to ensure that it could never happen again. While it lasted, though, the truce was magical, leading even the sober Wall Street Journal to observe, quote, "What appears from the winter fog and misery is a Christmas story, a fine Christmas story that is in truth the most faded and tattered of adjectives, inspiring." The first signs that something strange was happening occurred on Christmas Eve around 8:30 p.m. An officer of the Royal Irish Rifles reported to headquarters, quote, "Germans have illuminated their trenches, are singing songs, and wishing us a happy Christmas. Compliments are being exchanged, but am nevertheless taking all military precautions," end quote. Further along the line, the two sides serenaded each other with carols, the Germans singing Silent Night, being met with a British chorus of The First Noel. And scouts met, cautiously, in no man's land, the shell-blasted waste between the trenches. The war diary of the Scots Guards records that a certain Private Merker, quote, "met a German patrol and was given a glass of whiskey and some cigars, and a message was sent back saying that if we didn't fire at them, they would not fire at us," end quote. Several factors combined to produce the conditions for this Christmas truce. By December 1914, the men in the trenches were veterans familiar enough with the realities of combat to have lost much of the idealism they had carried into war in August, and most longed for an end to the bloodshed. The war they had believed would be over by Christmas, yet there they were in Christmas week, still muddied, cold, and in battle. Then on Christmas Eve itself, several weeks of mild but miserable soaking weather gave way to a sudden hard frost, creating a dusting of ice and snow along the front that made the men of both sides feel that something spiritual was taking place. Just how widespread the truce was is actually hard to say. It was certainly not general. There are plenty of accounts of fighting continued through the Christmas season in some sectors, and others of men fraternizing to the sound of guns firing nearby. One common factor seems to have been that the Saxon troops, universally regarded as easygoing, were the most likely to be involved and to have made the first approaches to their British counterparts. Quote, "We are Saxons, you are Anglo-Saxons," end quote, one shouted across no man's land. "What is there for us to fight about?" The most detailed estimate made by Malcolm Brown of Britain's Imperial War Museums is that the truce extended along at least 2/3 of British-held trench line and through southern Belgium. Many, perhaps close to the majority of the thousands of men who celebrated Christmas 1914 together, would not live to see the return of peace. But for those who did survive, the truce was something that would never be forgotten. And the military, quote, leaders, end quote, did everything in their powers to make sure that it would never happen again. Never happen after 1914. But the miracle of Christmas happened again the following year, in 1915. The forgotten Christmas truce the British tried to suppress is from Joe Shutt. New research has uncovered the most detailed account yet of the banned 1915, not just 1914, 1915 Christmas truce, where British and German soldiers again defied official orders to make peace in no man's land. On December 25th, 2015, as night descended over the Western Front, and on Christmas Eve the night before, the guns fell silent and carols drifted across no man's land. The Germans opened up first, singing hymns learnt in their native Rhineland and Bavaria, before the British responded, belting out Good King Wenceslas. At first light, on Christmas Day, the soldiers emerged unarmed from the trenches and met halfway across the muddy killing fields, actually shaking hands, exchanging buttons, sausage, and tins of bully beef. There was even a raucous football match, 50 aside. That night, fairy lights and were hauled over the parapets for the singing to continue. This is, of course, a story we're all familiar with, but the events described above did not take place during that Christmas truce of 1914, one of the documented stories of the First World War. Despite strict orders of British and German commanders to the contrary, exactly the same thing occurred the following year, in 1915. But this second unofficial truce was suppressed in its entirety, a final act of defiance and humanity whitewashed from history. There's been anecdotal evidence previously, but not until now has the full story of one unit's experience and the recriminations that followed been revealed. It was compiled by Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley. He had been poring over the diaries of members of the 15th Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers, which found itself on the front line on Christmas Day in 1915. But the missing link to his research was provided by a previously unseen diary belonging to Robert W.J. Keating, a private in the Royal Welsh, donated to the collection by a friend. It gives, says Riley, a remarkable blow-by-blow account of the truce British High Command never wanted anyone to read about. The order went along the lines in December 1915, almost immediately after the controversial General Sir Douglas Haig became Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force. There was to be no repeat of the unauthorized truce of 1914. Soldiers were warned. Quote, "Nothing of the kind is to be allowed this year," end quote. The Germans, meanwhile, explains Riley, were told any fraternizing with the enemy would result in execution. And what happened? On Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, they disobeyed orders. They were not going to fight for the criminal banking syndicate of the world, for the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, Lazards, the Pinkuses, the Warburgs, the Seifs, the Loebs, the Peseurs. No. They laid down their arms. And they played football. They drank together, they ate together. They sang together. Because the miracle of Christmas trumped the globalists' lust for blood and war and death. Christmas is about miracles, which is why we saw with the Obama regime, as I mentioned earlier, and the Biden regime, they don't want you saying Merry Christmas, because it stirs up what's right in people about helping others, about talking amongst themselves. What do the Marxists love? Lockdowns, right? So you don't talk. So you don't fraternize with anyone. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. There is zero reasons why we cannot summon the courage that was shown in 1914 and 1915 right now, over 100 years later. We should be talking about peace negotiations, not about sending more missiles, more ordnance, more tools for the globalists to kill. I want to close this Christmas Eve video with one of the most profound things that I was exposed to in Washington, D.C. I've been dealing with those scum for 36 years, trying to help people through healthcare policy that makes the healthcare delivery system more available, more affordable, more quality-oriented. Unfortunately, in those 36 years, the only person that actually listened to my approach was Ronald Reagan. Everyone else, it's fallen on deaf ears. Unfortunate, but true. This was passed on to me by one of the individuals who protected President Reagan. And I've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating on this Christmas Eve. Every morning when Ronald Reagan would go to the Oval Office, he would start the day by saying a prayer. It's a prayer, actually, that since I learned about it 36 years ago, I've said numerous times every day for the past 36 years, and will to the day I die. The Ronald Reagan prayer. It's very short, very sweet, very to the point. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. And where there is darkness, let me sow light. Faith, hope, and light. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. And have a very, very happy New Year. Because if you focus on faith, hope, and light, that you keep those two stories close to your heart of 1914 and 1915. If you keep them close to your heart, every day becomes Christmas Day. I thank you for joining me today. We are available 365 days a year with extra shows, content, guests, analysis, archives to all of our shows. We have our entire Freedom family through our premium service content and email service, 30 cents a day. Where I present information, I do another 4 to 5 video format shows every week. I have a 3-hour radio show every Sunday where we focus on providing you information to put you ahead of the globalist constructed curve that ends in a brick wall with the shattering of your freedoms, your liberties, your future, your life, your health, and the shattering of our constitutional republic. And we provide you an off-ramp with our information that I cannot talk about because of the ongoing oppression and censorship on every social media platform and through government agencies blocking certain content being presented on the radio. That's why DaveJanda.com exists. I hope you'll join us there for not just this holiday season, but for the months and years to come. I thank you for your time. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for joining me today. Merry Christmas.